So in this lecture, we are going to look at just one city. So we are spending one whole lecture on just one city. That means this city is very important. This is the city of Daxing/Chang'an. It's the same city. It served as the capital for the Sui and the Tang dynasty. After the long disunion, China was unified again under the Sui dynasty in the year 589. And at the end of, Sui was succeeded by Tang. And in 607, Tang Empire broke up into small kingdoms again. So that period from 589 to 907 can be considered as the second unitary China, while the previous Qin Han period, the first unitary China, and sandwiched in between is the age of disunion. And after Tang dynasty, there was a kind of second age of disunion, and then to be unified again. Kind of remind us in the Egyptian history, we have those old kingdoms, middle kingdoms, and late new kingdoms sandwiched with the so-called intermediate periods. So the Tang territory expanded to Central Asia, beyond the current border of China, northern Vietnam, northern Korea, and cultural influence of Tang reached Japan, had a huge impact on Japanese culture under the Tang dynasty. And the capital city of Tang is Chang'an. So Chang'an was internationally significant. And in the 8th century, students from all over the world went to Chang'an to study. That is a kind of international center for commerce, for education, and for cultural exchange. The location of Chang'an in relationship to the earlier Han dynasty, both these kind of unified empires had their capital city in Chang'an. This is the Han dynasty Chang'an we looked at in the previous lecture. And this is the Tang dynasty Chang'an. Tang Chang'an exceeded the size of Han dynasty Chang'an, and it was constructed to its south. This is the location of the Qin dynasty Xianyang. And the Zhou dynasty had their capital constructed in this location. Right? So this area, known as the Guanzhong area, or the area within passes, because, excuse me, because Xi'an, today's Xi'an is located in the Wei River Valley. The Wei River Valley was surrounded by mountains from the north and the south. A very kind of narrow but long, flat, fertile land. sandwiched between mountains. To the north is Qilianshan, Mount Qilian, and to the south is the Qinling, the range of Qin. There was an eastern pass, there was a western pass, there was a mountain pass that allowed them to enter the eastern area, eastern plain of China. So this area was called the 800 miles of flatland within the two pass, kind of guarded. So it's by the mountain and the pass. So in the ancient time, these were favorable location for capital cities because they were easy to defend, right? There were mountains serving as the natural barrier for invading forces. And there were passes that controlled the entrance and exit, which allowed them to defend themselves and also to march on to explore the outside world. The Tang capital city, Chang'an, the first thing you should remember is it is big, it is large. So this is the scale. This is 2 kilometers. This is 2 kilometers. So it is, roughly a 8 kilometer square. Right? The east-west dimension is slightly bigger than the north-south dimension. Excuse me, but roughly, 8,000 meters on each side. And it is also, quite a square. The city might have been inspired by the ritual of Zhou, the Book of Rites from the Zhou dynasty, in the book on craftsmanship that describes the ideal city for the Son of Heaven, which requires a square plan and 3 gates on each side. So the Chang'an city followed that pretty well. 3 gates on the west, 3 gates on the south, 3 gates on the east, and 3 gates on the north. The northern gates concentrate on the western part because the eastern part were occupied by more imperial palaces and reserved parks for the imperial family. The ritual of Zhou also dictated that there should be 9 streets and 9 avenues, dividing the interior into blocks. So here, broad and straight avenues and streets, not exactly 9 by 9, but pretty close, divide the interior into smaller squares. But I should say that, remember, each of these squares is like a square kilometer. So it is the size of a Roman colonial city, like the city in North Africa, the Roman centuriation city of Timgad. And indeed, those squares are known as ward, in Chinese called Li Fang. And those walls, in the original plan, 108 of them, a symbolic number, because this is the total number of constellation deities in Chinese mythology. So the city was constructed to symbolize heaven, and the Chinese also call imperial capital the heavenly capital. So each of those walls had their own gate. This is a detail of one of those small squares within the large square. Each of them was a city for their own right. They have wall, they have gate, and the inside was divided into into smaller blocks by crossing avenues, and further divided by smaller crossing streets, alleys. So the Chang'an city was not just one city in our common understanding of a city. It could be understood as a giant city of 108 smaller cities. So it's a collection of cities within the same enclosure. So that's the first thing I think we need to remember. Chang'an city is big. It is a collection of walled walls. Each one is a small city. And the city was also idealed, constructed according to an ideal. It was not a city grown naturally from a small village. The city was first planned. The walls were constructed first, and the material filled in. We know that because throughout the entire history of Sui-Tang dynasty Chang'an, toward the end of the 9th century, some of the southern walls were still not filled by population. So they first built a huge city and fill in the population. The southern part remained rural within the wall, even by the end of the Tang dynasty. So it was not a city constructed based on need. It is a city constructed to show the grandeur of a great empire. Professor Fu Xinian also discovered that the city was designed according to a module. For example, he analyzed the size and the proportion of different quarters of the city, all right? So in the northern part, the 12 walls form a square. And in the southern part, 12 ward, I'm sorry, nine ward form a half square. or 18 wards form a square. So he discovered it was regular. The dimensions were not planned on site, but on drawing board, you plan it like this and then impose it upon Earth. So it's very geometric and idealized. So there was a module in the planning of the city of Chang'an. Give you another idea, another way to understand the idea of the city of Chang'an. This is the Sui-Tang Chang'an from the 6th century to the early 10th century. And this is a Mingqing Beijing. It is from the 15th century to the 20th century, early 20th century, drawn to the same scale. Chang'an is bigger than Beijing. And the imperial palace of Chang'an for the Tang rulers was many times bigger than the imperial palace of Beijing. We know much better about Beijing, of course, because it's more recent. The walls were standing in the early 20th century, only dismantled by the 1970s. This is the famous Forbidden City, a World Cultural Heritage. So you can visit it today. This is the Imperial Palace for Mingqing, Beijing. And the Imperial Palace for Tang. This is the old Taiji Gong, or the Taiji Palace. The third Tang Emperor added Daming Gong. And Emperor Ming Huang added Xingqing Gong. So there are in total 3 palaces for the Tang rulers. And the smallest one, Xingqing Gong, is bigger than the Forbidden City. If you have been to the Forbidden City in Beijing, you know you walk inside for an entire day and you only see a tiny bit of it. So that was already pretty big. And the Tang palaces were much, much bigger. The 2 cities represent 2 different models for capital plan. The city of Chang'an, excuse me, use head model. In which the palace is attached to a side of the whole city. The city Mingqing Beijing is planned in the heart model. In which the palace is in the center, enclosed by the outer layers. For the city of Chang'an, this is the palace city. To its south is the imperial city. The palace city is the residence for the emperor and his extended family. And the imperial palace was the office, the government, the, all kind of bureaucratic branches. And the northern quarter, which has bigger walls, is more elite. Because they are convenient for those high officials to go to their office. All right, so these walls were pretty much occupied by the high officials and relatives, princes, and relatives to the emperor, those princes, imperial princes and princesses. But they all kind of related to one another in the head model. And this is the city for commoners. The closer you get, you are to the palace, the more prestigious. And the southern area, as I mentioned, at the end of the 9th century, were still pretty much empty, but each of them got a name. They were all named, and but some of those remained empty throughout the entire history of Chang'an. Well, the city of Beijing, we will look at later in more detail. This is the palace city, residence for the emperor. This is the imperial city, offices and direct service to the emperor. And this is during Qing dynasty, this is the Manchu city, the elite city. And this is the southern part, the Han city, the Chinese city, the Manchu city. So this also called outer city was originally planned to go all the way around the inner city. So it was related in the heart model. All right.